All right, y'all. Cool. I'm back in this John. All right, cool. So I don't know what that bug was that I had last time, but essentially if you're getting an error of some kind that's talking about global installs, like from an old Create React app package that's just getting in the way, all you have to really do is clear this your npx cache. I had to just do this, and then I was able to rerun my John here. I definitely, if I had some time, I would upvote my man's answer. I might just do that later. But and this is a good point to just kind of say, like, things are always going to go wrong in the in your web dev journey. Like, it is never smooth. But patience, perseverance, asking questions, and Google is really the key. There is no shame in Googling the answer when you get stuck. That is literally step number one. But cool. So, what we were in the middle of before I kind of encountered that weird bug was talking about Create React app. And, the difference between the React tool chains and how Create React app is a pretty widely used developer tool chain for new React projects. It is a package that you can run very easily using Node. You can execute it using Node. So all you need to do is make sure you have Node installed on your machine. We kind of went through that. Then you can use this command, npx space create-react-app with the name of whatever the app is you're building. And it should run a set of a couple scripts that's going to build your new project for you. So as you can see, I already ran it in this terminal here. So let me close this one. So it's still kind of running, which is great. My John is a little slow, which is actually perfect for right now. So as soon as you run, where did I do this? Let's see, I'm trying to see this in the terminal. Oh yeah. So as soon as I ran this command, npx create-react-app with the name of the folder or project I was trying to create, right? First time I ran it, it was like, hey, you need to install the Create React app package. Cool, that's not a problem. So I said yes. Then I got this line that's saying, hey, creating a new React app in whatever the path is of where you ran that command. So this is why I'm saying you got to be really careful where you run the npx create react app command, because that'll just put it in that folder. So I was on my desktop for obvious reasons, safe places to just put folders. And now it's made a new folder for me called the same thing that I typed in that create react app command. So that's just important to remember, that your folder is going to be named the same thing that you had in this create react app command. So just reading the output, right? So this runs like a script. There's a number of different things that happen. And so how it begins is it says it's going to create a new React app for you. Cool. So first thing it does is it installs a bunch of packages. It might take some time, but essentially it starts installing the React package, the React DOM package, React scripts, and then the Create React app template package, which are all four of these packages are packages that come from Node in the Node package manager, so NPM. We'll talk a lot more about what NPM is in another moment, but really what NPM is it's a package manager. So just like in other programming languages, you use like some kind of command line tool to help you install other libraries or other packages. Node NPM is the package manager for JavaScript. So whenever we're talking about, hey, you need to download that library or that package in JavaScript, you're gonna use NPM to do that, and that's why having Node and NPM on your machine is really important. But the React DOM, React scripts, and Create React app template packages are already built. These are already built packages that people are spending a lot of time continuing to update. React is actually a library that was built by engineers at Facebook. So Facebook actually owns the React kind of code base. And so the engineers at Facebook, those same engineers getting paid good, a very, very decent salary out in the tech space are some of those developers are responsible for keeping up React and making sure that it's still accessible and easy for people to use publicly and building all their apps, which is really cool. And in the Create React app template clearly is like a package that they use in the create React app command to make our make the creation of our project a little easier. But each of these libraries and packages in Node have other packages that they need to run, right? So in total, it says it added 1,370 packages that it needed to add for the project. And there's just a bunch of output. So it talks a little bit about how many of those packages are looking for funding. And, so just if you were somebody interested in funding those projects, most of them are open source. They just kind of added that line in there for you to kind of remember. So here's some important stuff, right? Something you might miss when you kind of first get started with Create React App. It initialized a Git repository for you. So if you know what Git is, this probably is like, oh, that's dope, right? But if you don't know what Git is, you're like, okay, this is just another line on the terminal. You're like, Cam, break that down. Like, that's exactly why I'm here, fam. So this line on the terminal is talking about a Git repository, which is going to be really helpful for when you start trying to push your project to GitHub or other kind of repository hubs online that use Git. Git is a command line tool that is used for like it's a software that is used for what we call version control, which basically keeps records of your code at different moments in time. So think about it like, when you're playing like a game like GTA or something, there's moments where you want to save the game because, you just hit a checkpoint, you just hit a lick on somebody, I'm saying, the vibes there. Git is the way you can save your code over time. So you can check back to those moments in time when things are going wrong or when you want to take a look back at something. So it really keeps an accurate log of all of the different versions your code has seen over time. So that's one of the things that we use Git for. And we'll talk a lot more about that soon. But Create React App is dope because it just makes the process of getting that project started with Git even easier. It takes care of a step that you might not think that it needed to, but it does for you anyway. So then, it adds all the dependencies for the template. So as you can see, like this kind of console logging a lot of stuff, right? This is what happens when folks start getting into scripting. So we're not going to talk too much about scripting in this kind of like unit of study, but if you're the type of person that's really interested in like building tools for other developers or other things like that, scripting is a really cool thing to learn because you could be writing a set of like couple commands that are doing some really interesting things, and then by just logging what's going on at different moments in time, you can make a very helpful tool for other developers to use. And you can even do things like, hey, like, is it okay to proceed? Type Y, and then they type Y, and then things go, right? So somebody wrote this script that is actually installing all of this for us. We don't really have to do anything but type the name of the project, and that's it. So after it installs everything, it'll tell you if there's any security things to take a look at, which this is kind of common in Node, that you'll see some kind of security vulnerabilities. There's not too much that you as an independent developer can do with that awareness just off rip, except know that that is the case. And then, if you do want to kind of figure out where those are happening, you can kind of figure out where those issues are, look at some of those repositories, maybe ask for some help, see what's going on there. But trust in the community. If they're able to solve some of those vulnerabilities, they will. So for now, it's just something to note, not necessarily something to worry about. Yeah, the last thing that it does is it creates a Git commit for you. So again, for those of y'all who understand what Git is doing, you're probably like, oh, that's dope. But for those of y'all who don't, you're like, what does this line mean? Cam, break it down. And of course, fam, that is what I'm here for. The Git commit is like another really important aspect to how Git and GitHub work, is like so basically, like I said, Git is like how you save your code at different moments in time. A commit is like that recorded save. So it's like whenever you want to save something, you have to commit the changes. What the Create React app does is for you is it sets your project up with Git, and it makes a commit for you after it runs. So it already has that first record of, hey, this is what happened. This is as soon as you ran Create React app, here's all of the files that were there at that moment in time. So if something messes up, you could just go back to this blank slate of having your project first installed, which is really helpful. But then boom, it says success, created that folder for you. And it says inside that directory, you can run several commands: npm start, npm run build, npm test, npm run eject. So npm start starts the development server, npm run builds, bundles the app into static files for production, npm test starts the test runner, and an npm run eject removes the tool and copies build dependencies, config files, and scripts into the app directory. If you do this, you can't go back. The most common ones you're going to use are these top three. We don't really use run eject all that often. So you don't got to really worry about that one if you're someone just getting started. But npm start is the command you're going to use all the time after you're running create React app to get your app running. So this is just how you run your app to get it up and running so you can see the changes happening over time. Npm run build, we run this command when we're getting ready to take whatever the app, like when you're getting ready to publish the app on like a hosting, in a hosting scenario. So if you're like, oh, my React app is done, I want to host it, you're going to need to run the build. That's just a step you need to do to get the files ready for production. npm test is another command you'll use pretty often. It starts the test runner. And so when you're testing your JavaScript files or testing your React code, running this npm test, create React app builds a test for you, so you can automatically kind of just test your code real quick. And yeah, we'll talk a lot more about that in future sessions too. But yeah, so it says, hey, we suggest that you begin typing cd in the name of the app or project you had, and then npm start. So as a default, it doesn't move into the new folder for you in case you want to do other things in the current folder that you're in. So I'm still in my desktop, right? But clearly I made this new folder called homework 1 that is my React application. So in order to start messing around with the React, I have to change into the homework 1 project that I made, or the files that are there, right? And then I can do npm start. And npm start, like I said, is going to run another set of scripts that is going to make it possible for me to see my application running on a local server. So it says right here, starting the development server. If everything works well, you should see localhost 3000 pop up, and it should just open whatever your default browser is. And after the server kind of starts up and runs, the page should reload, and you should be able to see your running React application with the default kind of React app configuration. So if you see this spinning React icon, congratulations, you just ran your first React app using create React app. So, and if not, it might be because your server is taking a little bit of time to run. That's totally normal. As you can see, mine took a little bit of time. Yeah, that's all it really takes to start the new React project. As you can see, inside of your terminal now, when you go back to it, you're going to see all types of kind of like build output happening over time with your code as it's running. What's important to know is that when you have the server running for your local development server, it's using your local machine to run the server. So nobody can go to this, like you can't go like to my localhost 3000 and run this. Like you would never see that. So this is only local to your machine. And if you wanted to see it on a different device on your local network, you could with the IP address that it has there. But this is all local. So nobody actually, this isn't like a live app that anyone else can see. This is just local to your machine. But important to note is that right after you run npm start, this just kind of takes up a terminal window. So this terminal window is actively running. You can tell by the fact that this is like waiting for output and not allowing me to input any kind of code at that line. So it's important to know that when you start a React project and you do like create React app and everything, and then you say npm start, you need one terminal window dedicated to just keeping the server up. If you want to close the server or stop it, you can use Control-C, will stop the server. But once you stop the server, your localhost 3000 isn't going to work anymore, right? So if you ran something, you see localhost 3000, site can't be reached, it might be because your server stopped running. right? So you're going to want to make sure you go back into the project folder and then use npm start so that you keep that server up at localhost 3000. Yeah, so that's just important to know that you need that terminal window with the server up in order for your application to show up. So that being the case, normally what I do is I just, either open a new tab on the terminal. So I just, you can really easily add a new tab onto your terminal, and then you have one that's just for your server, and then you have just another one that you can start messing around with and doing other stuff. Or if sometimes what I'll do is after doing create React app, because I do that all normally on the terminal, I'll run the server here. And then what I'll do is I'll actually open this folder in VS Code and then use the terminal in VS Code for all the other stuff I want to do. So that's another reason why that integrated terminal in your text editor is really helpful. So VS Code, right, is the text editor, Visual Studio Code. Text editors are where we kind of edit and modify our code. So if you're new to this, you might want to download a text editor like VS Code. I recommend that one, but you could take your pick, and every developer has their own preferences. So I'm not going to reopen the old window, but I'll open a new VS Code window in general. And I definitely said I wasn't going to open the old window, but it's okay. Life be like that sometimes. But actually, I'm going to keep this up for a second. Actually, no, I will come back to this. But for right now, I want to start a new VS Code window just for myself, so I don't have that old one getting updated. And when my Jawn refreshes and loads properly, I'm just gonna open the files from this in VS Code. So there's a number of ways to do that, right? If I wanted to kind of see those files in VS Code, I could get a copy of the path here, right? So clearly this path is where that folder is. So I could just open that folder at that particular path, right? So I could go to my desktop, go to homework 1, and then open it, and then we'll start to see all of the files. So I'll just do that for now, open that folder. And when this loads, then we'll start taking a look at some of the files that came pre-built with the Create React app toolchain. And that's kind of where we'll kind of take our first step. So, when you open a folder in VS Code, remember that as if you open an actual folder, it should show the name of that folder here on the Explorer, and then you can see all of the files inside of the folder. And then if you went to terminal and opened a new terminal for VS Code, the terminal should already be connected to that particular folder as well, right? So if I typed the pwd command to get the present directory I'm in, you can see that I'm in my homework 1 folder, which is the folder I made with Create React app, right? So it's just really important to make sure that you're in the right folder all the time, right? It might sound self-explanatory, but trust me, it's very easy to make a mistake and think you're in the right folder, start using a bunch of commands, then realize you're not in the right folder, and then that present a bunch of issues for you later down the road. So I like to triple check that I'm in the right folder. I got it here, I got it there. And I know that this is the right folder based on that Create React app that I ran also. So now that I'm inside of here, let's just take a look at the files that came pre-built with Create React app. First, we got this Readme file, this readme.md. Every .md file is a markdown file, and markdown is just a language that people use to format documents. It's a text document formatter kind of language. Markdown is a really popular text markup language. So it's very common that you'll see people have .md files in different documentation-based spaces. Readme files are pretty interesting. Most developers use Readme files as a essentially to kind of detail what's going on inside of the project, right? So by default, Create React App toolchain built a README file for us that kind of explains a little bit more of what's going on in this project. So it talks about how this was bootstrapped by Create React App, talks about the different scripts. So if you forgot what those scripts were, you could always look at the README file. It will have that stuff in there. Talks about running your app using npm start, test, and everything. And then it gives you some more resources. So it talks more about the React app documentation, talks about where you can go to learn React, just different things that might be helpful for you over time, right? So some of these aren't as important right now, but just to know that they're here, right? Like, deployment, all this kind of stuff, which we'll definitely cover that. But it's cool that the Create React app kind of creates a README for you. Of course, you might want your own README file, so you can definitely edit this to be whatever you want it to be, but it's just good. They gave you one as a template to start off with. Next file we have is the package.json file. A .json file stands for a JavaScript object notation. So JSON is what's the best way to describe JSON? JSON is a format, as a text format for conveying data. So in two senses, we can think about JSON. One is in just like being a document that you can read and kind of see the different data that is being kind of transmitted in that document, right? It's very legible, kind of got these key value pairs, right? That kind of define different kind of data, right? Every JSON file is like that, whereas key value pairs kind of defining out certain data pieces separated by a comma. But the most important thing to remember about JSON is this is actually a JavaScript object. So if you remember what we talked about with JavaScript data types, or if you yourself are familiar with fundamental JavaScript, you know that there's a type of a data collection in JavaScript called an object. And an object has a curly brace and then has key value pairs of data, right? And then you can reference those keys with those different, and then get the corresponding value for those keys, right? So JSON is a really popular data format because one, it is legible to the human eye. You can just read it. But then two, it's already prepared to be converted and worked with in JavaScript, but then also in certain other languages, they make it very easy to know, oh, this is like an object, or this is what some folks might call a dictionary, and I can access the values for these particular keys if I wanted to, right? So JSON is a very popular data format. The package.json, however, is a very specific file that comes pre-built in all applications that are using Node, that were installed using Node, right? So we've used Node previously in like other instances as like a means of running our JavaScript files, right? And I told you Node is like the runtime engine for running JavaScript files. So for instance, if we had like a random, let's see, if we had like a random JavaScript file, just make those random ones. Inside of that JavaScript file, we had like a little, hello world message or something. We can use Node to run that JavaScript file, right? So, Node Node allows you to run JavaScript and then, see the output in the console. But you can also initialize whole projects using Node. That is what we do when we're building projects that are going to use Node and NPM to run themselves. So the Create React app command, right, when we use npx blah 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 blah, it's using node and npm to initialize an entire project. So what happens with node and npm initialized projects is that any project that uses node and uses npm like that will create a package.json file for you, which essentially is kind of like, it defines all the metadata for your project and it stores a record of all the dependencies that you're installed at that level of the project. So so remember when Create React App was like, oh, we're installing a bunch of dependencies. These were the dependencies that it was installing. The package.json file also has some information about like the different scripts. So that npm start, build, test, eject. The reason we can use those commands are because they're listed as scripts here. We can also add our own scripts to use with npm in this section. And then there's like a lot of configuration things that are there to make the project run the way that we would expect it to. So this package.json is also made by default by Create React App, and it's just used to keep a record of all of our dependencies and any of the other configuration that we need, as well as scripts that we want to use to run our application. The package-lock.json is a file that gets created every time you update the packages inside of your folder, inside of your project, right? So package.json will define those packages, right, as dependencies. And then when you install packages, you end up creating this node modules folder, which got created up top here. This node modules folder holds all of the packages, right? So there's a lot of packages that Create React App needed that we saw already when it said install 13, like 1,300 packages or something. But I guess one thing to see, just to show you, is that some of the packages that were necessary for us to kind of get started with React, right? The React DOM, all those packages, they get installed to the node modules folder. So it holds a record of that. Whoops. You see what happens when your computer just be lagging a little bit? There you go. So yeah, the React folder is here, the React DOM folder. And then all these other folders were installations that were required for all these other packages to be installed, right? So just to install these dependencies, we needed all of these dependencies. So that's kind of crazy. But the React library is stored actually in this folder inside of your node modules folder. And much like every other package you install, you'll see a record of it in like the version of that package in the package.json, but the actual files for the package live in the node modules folder. And then the package-lock.json kind of just gets updated every time you update your packages. So you don't really got to worry too much about this file. You don't really do too much inside of it. But just know that it's there to kind of keep a record of what packages it already has seen in the project. And then we got this .git ignore file, which is a very important file, especially for development and getting ready for production, and or like not less about production, but when you're developing and getting ready to like push your code onto Git or GitHub or something. The .git ignore file is basically a file that lets you say, what files do I not want to put in GitHub, right? And so you can ignore specific files from Git in the source control and version control here. And sometimes you want to do that for security reasons, like, oh, like certain files might have like passwords and stuff. And it's really not, it's not good to put those up on GitHub, right? So you can ignore them from Git by putting them in here. And so by default, Create React App puts a couple files and folders, anything with a slash is a folder, here to be ignored by Git. So you're not, storing big folders or anything in your Git repo, which is just helpful to save you some space and make it quicker for you. So yeah, those are the 4 core files, but then we got these other 3 folders. We already talked about the node modules folder. So the last 2 we have are the public and the source folder. So here is where things actually get very interesting, right? Because as you can see, we're still running a server here. So you should still have this kind of spinning icon going on with the Create React App logo. But where's all that kind of happening? How is that happening, right? That's what's going on inside of these last two folders, the public and source folder. So first, let's talk about what we know, right? Most of us, this is our first time looking at React. So we're gonna assume all we know is that we're looking at a website, right? So there's three things that we know every website normally has, right? HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's it. Every website has those things. You know what I'm saying? Like some might not have JavaScript. That's debatable. But most websites nowadays are using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And all websites are using at least HTML and CSS. But the thing is that that's all we really know, especially from our last couple sessions. We haven't really talked about React too much. So we're going to start by just looking at the HTML and CSS and kind of see what we can learn just from that. So I'm just going to pull up the Chrome developer tools. So just using the inspector tool to pull up like kind of the dev tools and look at let's just look at some of the elements and stuff that are coming in here. So remember, Chrome developer tools are really helpful for like kind of just keeping just to kind of looking at a website and seeing how it was created with regard to its source code. So we can see the HTML code, we can see the CSS, and there's ways for us to see the JavaScript as well. But so right now, like any website, right, we're looking at HTML. So I'm just going to pull this down a little bit. And in a second, we'll just kind of move over to the VS Code. So we'll see it there. So clearly, this is a regular HTML file, right? It has a head. Inside of the head, it has some metadata like we talked about. The metadata, some of it's defining like the character set it's using here, the viewport, like the initial scale of the website when you first load it. Some things that they made to like to make like styling a little easier, like the steam color and it has a description. So remember I said SEO uses metadata tags. So this metadata description is just part of the SEO process, website created using Create React App. It's linking to a couple of icons that it's going to use. And then says this manifest.json provides metadata used when your web app is installed on a user's mobile device or desktop. So it's using this manifest.json thing. So there's some comments here that are interesting, right? Notice the use of the blank in the tags above. It will be replaced with the URL of the public folder during the build, blah, 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 blah. So interesting there. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But yeah, so then we see this title, right? So remember, all websites that use a title in the head create that title in the tab. And then, some scripts. So this is another link to a JavaScript script. So it's linking to something called static.js/bundle.js. It defers it. So it waits till the whole page loads before it runs that JavaScript. Then it has a couple style tags. And the style tags are defining a little bit of CSS just in the HTML. Normally, we don't put the CSS all in the HTML, but you can add styles to HTML files and add your own CSS there just by using a style tag. So just like you can use script tags to write JavaScript in the HTML file, normally we put them in their own files, but sometimes, like in this case, you can see that they added some CSS and stuff to this file here. Cool. And then the body, right? Inside of the body, is where we actually see the visual component. So hovering over the body, we see the entire website is loaded. There's a no scripts tag, which runs if the JavaScript on the website is turned off, you actually see this message here. But then we see just a div with the ID of root and a div that says class app and in the header, right? Which is kind of what we're looking at in blue highlighted right now. And then inside of that, we see an image tag and this little logo that's spinning. We see a paragraph, right? That says edit source/app.js and save to reload. And then an anchor that is pointing a link to a website. And then that's it, right? So this is what we're seeing on the browser, right? So now let's just take a look at the files in VS Code and see kind of what React app, create React app is actually doing for us, right? So I'm gonna just go back to VS Code, and this file, this HTML file, let's just figure out where this index.html file is, right? So I already know where it is. It's in the public folder, but I didn't mean to make that like braggadocious. Like, I know where it is. Y'all don't know where it is, but it's it's in the public folder. And there's that index.html file if you want to find it real quick. So cool. I'm gonna open that index.html file and let's just see what's in here. Okay, right. So we got that doc type HTML. We got the HTML tag. I could close it. So remember, like I told you, all HTML files start off with this same structure. Inside of that HTML file tag, we have the head tag and we have the body tag, right? So this is a basic HTML site in terms of how it's structured here. Nothing crazy complicated. Inside the head, we kind of already went through some of this. So we see that meta tag, the like little things related to the links, you know what I'm saying? The meta description with the website created using Create React app, right? The manifest JSON, all that stuff we're looking at. So here we see that public URL thing. So it's basically saying this public folder, it's going to replace this URL with the name of that folder when it actually gets built. So that's cool. Nothing crazy there. We see that title for the React app in the head. So then we got the body, and we got this no script tag, which we saw. Then we got this div ID equals root, and it's empty. There's nothing inside of here, right? And that's it? Question mark? What's going on here, right? Like, clearly on this index.html, we see kind of this div ID root, it's empty. But when we go back to the main site, we can see there's a div ID root, right? But inside of that div ID root is not empty. There's all types of data in there. There's this app, there's this header, there's this image, there's this paragraph, there's this code thing, right? Like, where is all that code, right? Like, wouldn't that be in the HTML as like a structural kind of thing? Clearly, this is HTML that we're seeing. Otherwise, we wouldn't see it on this elements list, right? So where is this? Where is this code coming from, right? Everything else in this public folder is just like, you know, images and stuff, like nothing crazy. The manifest.json, they said in that HTML file, was just like, this is just something that helps us keep a record of, you know, if users downloading, what does it say? If the user's downloading something, blah, blah, blah. So clearly this manifest.json ain't doing anything crazy. The robots.txt file is just a file that websites have so that, you know, Google and other website crawlers can find their site. So nothing else in this public folder is actually of interest. This only thing here is this index.html that's talking about this div ID root that's empty. And we're trying to figure out where's the other bit of the code, right? So the only other place for us to look is this source folder. And once you open this source folder, you're going to be pretty interested by the fact, first off, that most everything in this folder is a JavaScript file. The app.js, app.test.js, index.js, right? And then a couple other files, report web vitals.js, setup test.js, right? SVG, this is just for the logo. So this is just a data version of the logo. And then then we have a couple CSS files as well. So, sorry, y'all, I'll be taking like ginger shots sometimes so that my voice and my throat don't get messed up. I'm talking OD. I just didn't want y'all to think I'm over here like taking a shot of like tequila or something in the middle of my lesson or something. That'd be OD wild. Like, it's definitely ginger. And I'm doing it so I can keep it popping. But I try to do it all smooth too, but you know, it's like kind of hard to do. I'm like the only one talking, so it's like low key hard. Just making a joke real quick. Anyway, so this source folder has a couple files that are pretty interesting, right? We have this app.css. This looks like just some CSS, you know, just some regular CSS. We talked about CSS in the last week. The dot refers to a class, so any element with this class name. So clearly there might be some element that has this class name app that's getting some styles here, right? But this is just kind of CSS. The keyframes thing might be a little interesting if you don't know like a lot of the intermediates or advanced CSS, but the keyframes thing is a way in CSS that you can kind of make animations happen, right? So, you know, app logo spin, I'm sure you can guess what this CSS is doing, from transform, rotate 0 degrees, 360 degrees. You know what I'm saying? so that's what that is. But this is just CSS, you know what I'm saying? Like, interesting there, right? Okay, so this isn't the culprit. There's nothing interesting there. App.js. Okay, well, what's this? Interesting. Well, what is this, right? What are we looking at? Couple import lines. So import logo from logo.svg. So, okay, maybe this is just importing the logo file. Import /app.css. So, okay, that CSS file we were just looking at, we're importing it here. And then we have this function. Okay, well, this looks like a regular JavaScript function, right? And it's using that old function syntax that I was telling y'all about, function, name of the function, and then kind of open parentheses. So this kind of just looks like a JavaScript function, and then it's exporting that function. Okay, if you don't know about JavaScript, you might be like, you could probably guess what this is doing in terms of, okay, it's importing some stuff, probably uses those stuff in the function, and then it exports the function. So we probably can make a call to this function from a different file. That's exactly what it's doing, if you were wondering. So inside of this function is really interesting. Well, we see this returns, and so a return in any kind of function is just kind of saying, what is this function going to return back to the user? So this return statement is saying div, header, image, what? What is this? You know what I'm saying? Like, well, this is React, really. You know what I'm saying? Like, this code is making reference to those same things that we were talking about here, right? If we kind of look closely, we see inside of the div ID root, there's supposed to be this div app header, image, paragraph, anchor. And then in this app.js, we see the div app, we see header, we see image, we see the paragraph, and we see the anchor. Okay. So is this the HTML that's missing? The answer is not quite, right? Yes and no, not quite. What we're looking at here is React code, and React is written in, there's two ways to write React. One way is just all in JavaScript, but it really becomes really annoying and hard to see. But the other way is with a syntax called JSX, which is a syntax that allows us to write React in a more easy to see way that kind of resembles HTML, right? It even uses some similar looking tag names, but all of these things that we're looking at here is JavaScript, right? So if I hover over this doesn't say div like a HTML file might, right? If I go back to this public HTML file and I kind of highlight over some of these things, you see how with HTML, it's kind of giving you like, oh, this element does blah, 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 blah. You know what I'm saying? Like, well, hovering over those files in this aren't bringing up, no, this element does this. This is bringing up some Jsx Intrinsic Elements .div React .detailed HTML props. You know what I'm saying? Like some really interesting code here, because this actually isn't an HTML element yet. This is what we call a JSX element, or a JSX intrinsic element. The interesting thing about React is that you can use all the HTML elements that you're used to, or that you might find in a reference on like somewhere about how do I do blah, blah, blah in HTML. React has an equivalent intrinsic element that you can use to represent that. So this div, header, image, paragraph, anchor are representing the HTML equivalent of those tags, but this is doing this in React. So before we kind of push forward, let's go back to the React docs, because you might be like, yo, this is wild. What is this? Right? And so we're going to go to the main concepts, and we're going to go into the introducing JSX section, which is saying here like, hey, this funny tag syntax is not a string nor HTML, it's JSX, a syntax extension to JavaScript. We use it to just kind of describe what the UI should look like. But this is JavaScript. So it's really important to know that JSX produces React elements. We will explore rendering them to the DOM, but you can see the basics of JSX down below. So I'll let you go and read this on your own time. But what you can see here is how JSX kind of gets rendered in general. And just for the sake of it, I'm kind of curious what the new React doc says, how it kind of talks about these JSX elements and stuff. I know that they're still in the state of like this, of getting the stuff together. So I wonder if they have all this stuff about JSX in there and stuff like that. Cool. So JSX says here, JSX is putting markup into JavaScript. So it's like the web has been built on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for many years. We kept content in HTML, design in CSS, and logic in JavaScript, often in separate files. Content was marked up inside HTML while the page's logic lived separately in JavaScript. But as the web became more interactive, logic increasingly determined content. JavaScript was in charge of the HTML, right? When we were doing a tic-tac-toe game, we had to use the JavaScript to tell the HTML what it needed to show. That is why in React, rendering logic and markup live together in the same place, components. And then this is going to talk a little bit more directly about like how components and stuff work with this example of a button. But essentially, it's saying that every React component is a JavaScript function that may contain some markup that React renders into the browser. React components use a syntax extension called JSX to represent that markup. JSX looks a lot like HTML, but it's a bit stricter and can display dynamic information, right? So what we're looking at here is JSX. It looks just like HTML. So if you were like, this looks just like HTML, you're right. It even has the kind of same principles of HTML where you have an opening tag and a closing tag, and then you have, you can nest elements inside of it. So this div has elements nested inside of it, like this header and this image and paragraph and everything. But really, like it says, this is a markup to allow you to have the visual element and add JavaScript to it in the same place, which is super powerful for what React allows you to do very easily. So in this app.js file, remember, this is a JavaScript file. So I can do all types of stuff. I can add, I can add new functions, you know what I'm saying? Like just by kind of putting some new functions into the thing, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? I could just start messing around with this, add some more functions. If I want other variables, I can do that, right? But inside of here, we can see that at certain points, this code is going to be able to interact with all the other code defined in this JavaScript file. So we're going to talk a lot about that in a bit, but just believe me that what's really cool about React and the code and the way that it's structured is that you can see the visual elements and change them programmatically from the same place. And that's exactly what's happening in these source files like this app.js. So if we go back to our spinning React globe, right? The main React project here, it says edit source/app.js and save to reload, right? So, okay, let's do that real quick. So I'm just gonna go here and I'm just gonna change this to say, yo, our first React app. And I'm gonna try to save this in a way where we can see the change happen. So I'm gonna save this. I just Command S. Thought I did. Save. I think it's just trying to save it. Just taking a second. All right, save. Cool. So now let's take a look at what happens here on the browser. So now that I saved this, maybe my drawing is taking a minute because, my computer is just slow, but it's defeating the purpose here, you know what I'm saying? Being so slow, you know what I'm saying? Okay, cool, right? We saw this change live in front of us. This changed from what it said before, like edit the app to, yo, our first React app. And then if we take a look at the HTML in here, we also see that that HTML got updated too with this paragraph. So if I go back and I, let me just add another HTML element, or let me just add a new element. So I'm gonna write another JSX element in here. So I'm gonna just, maybe I'll just, inside of this, before the image, I'm just gonna add a heading, and I'm gonna say, dang, JSX is interesting. And I'm gonna save that. And so keep a lookout on both of these, right? So first, we're looking at this image here, right? But look at how this code just updated. You see how this code just kind of got inserted into the already existing file. And then on top of it, we just see kind of the app on the left just reload really quickly. That is all possible based, given the fact that React is using JavaScript to manipulate this website in faster and more intelligent ways. So it's clearly inserted new HTML for us to see at the end level of like our final application, but also with the server running, we can see those changes happen live, which is really helpful, and why we use that development server. So the app.js, app.css is actually where we're defining those visual elements that we want to see. But that doesn't solve that mystery of, well, how does that then get put into the index.html and this div that clearly is still empty, but then when we actually run the index.html on the server, we see it's not empty. So what's going on there? And that, my friends, is the role of this index.js file, where we can see a lot more JavaScript, right? So this is all still JavaScript. A lot of imports. We're importing React from the React library, importing the React DOM from the React DOM library, importing that index.css file, which is, as you guessed, just a little CSS file with some styling in there, and importing the app from the app. Okay, remember like that app.js file where we have this function called app that is exporting an app? Well, in the index.js, we're actually calling that app and bringing that into here. And then we have a couple other files like this report web vitals file as well. Then we see this really funky looking thing right here, this funky little function called React DOM.render. And the React DOM is render is, so this function render is a function that if you look at it very closely, so this is all parentheses, so if I close this, right? So this is a function, React DOM.render. And inside of there, it looks like we're calling something looking like HTML, but really this is also us using the JSX syntax. And we're kind of basically saying create React that by default runs React projects in what's called strict mode. We'll talk about that a little later. That's just not really important. But what you can see here is that this app, the app component that we were talking about before is here in this render line, right? So we get this app component, and then we see this line that says document get element by ID root. So what does this look like, right? Document get element by ID, right? This looks like a DOM manipulation function. It looks like one of those functions we were looking at the other day, and when we were talking about how JavaScript can update the HTML using the DOM. Well, get element by ID root. Okay, what element has ID root inside of the HTML file? Oh, that div that is just sitting there. Oh, okay. So what's going on here must be that this function is responsible for taking whatever React component or JSX we want to see and pushing that into the HTML document as HTML elements. So these are clearly HTML elements. Otherwise, we wouldn't see them. But what this is doing is saying, take this app, right? Take that app that we've been working with and right, take that app component and render it into our browser underneath that root, right? So here we can see clearly this is just the app component and all of the different elements that we have inside of that app.js. And that's exactly what's going on with Create React App, is we use this index.js file to determine what element, what component are we going to render first. and it renders that component inside of the index.html that's inside of the public folder. And that's how the React app first starts, with all of the stuff connected. So Create React App did all of that for us. We didn't have to do anything. Matter of fact, when you use Create React App, you don't even need to change the index.js too much until you start doing some more sophisticated things. We just start working with the app.js and actually making changes just like we did here, using this JSX syntax, which is both a combination of the HTML element that we need to see, that we want to see, and the corresponding JavaScript that we want to run inside. And we'll talk a lot more about that in future sessions. But essentially, Create React App creates all of these files. The other files, this setup test is for like testing. Nothing too important to talk about there. And the app.test.js is the actual test file if you wanted to look at the tests that run when that Create React App defines for you first. These are the tests right there. We'll talk about that also. But everything else is just, a logo file, a couple JavaScript functions to do some other interesting things, but nothing really vital. The most important stuff is this index.js file where we determine what component, and we'll talk about components more on Thursday. What component are we rendering? And then the app.js, where we actually write out the visual things of the component that we want to see and change. And then other than that, we just have those setup files. And that's exactly what Create React App does. It sets up your project with these core files that are really important, but gets you out the gate with a project that's already connected that you can just start manipulating in the app.js and then with your own components, which we'll talk about in the future. And you don't have to do any of that configuration. It already wires it up, sets it up for you. All you have to do is run the command, build your folder, and then start the server, and you'll have your React app running and ready to go. And yeah, my friends, that is how React works. Hopefully you're able now to kind of create React app on your machine and get it running, build your first couple projects that way, and then start learning a little bit more of the different components, just different frameworks of React, which we'll talk about in this using the React docs. These 12 main concepts are what we're going to be covering, as well as, you might be wondering like, okay, well, where do I learn all of these visual things? Well, just like I was saying before, it's important to continue to learn just more things about HTML and CSS. That undoubtedly is going to happen. So just as a resource, I really do love the HTML reference of the W3 schools, the tag reference, so you can see all the different tags that you might want to use, right? And so I normally, if I don't know a tag, I might search it. But the common ones, divs, anchors, all these HTML tags, React already has them built out for us as JSX. So you can just make use of them really easily, just like this. So feel free to play around with it now that you have this running. And yeah, happy hacking, as the Create React app people say. So yeah, thank you for taking the time to listen into this.